Hello, my name is Dan Johnson. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about a brand new Big Finish box set called Classic Doctors New Monsters, and this set is titled Faithful Friends. I think this is the fifth one in this range. It is involving, as you can imagine, classic Doctors and new monsters together, and in this set we have a story with the Fourth Doctor and the Lupari, we have the Eighth Doctor and the Monks, and then we have a two-parter with the Second, Seventh Doctor, but never meeting, and the Krillitanes. The Big Finish podcast were very keen not to spoil anything about this episode, and though I don't do spoilers anyway, I'm going to be extra cautious this time when I talk about this box set, because I don't want to go into any amount of detail that will expose what's actually going on in the story, and it would obviously ruin it if you decide to listen to it for yourself. We'll start off with the Krillitane two-parter. In this story, the Doctor, Zoe, and Jamie go to this research base that are trying to use Krillitanes and turn their abilities into something that they can use for warfare, etc. And the dynamic between the three of them is really great, but also the characters are really great, and they're all giving really great performances. What makes this episode really stand out is that there is an amazing twist that really subverts your expectations of this episode, and there is a beautiful final scene that made me ponder it for a few days after I listened to it. I thought that it was really poignant, and I wasn't expecting it. The second episode, featuring the Seventh Doctor and a companion called Ray, who I've not really heard of much in terms of Big Finish. I know her original story, her first story, was Delta and the Bannerman, and there was this whole thing in behind the scenes where they were unsure who was going to take over after Bonnie Langford, so they kind of threw in a couple of people, and one of them was using this Welsh character of Ray from Delta and the Bannerman. But of course, Ray is not the focus of the episode, it's Zoe once again, and the dynamic between those two is really good. Their relationship is brilliant, because the Doctor is carrying a lot of grief and a lot of guilt for the events of the War Games, and you can kind of see it in the Second Doctor story, and for that to sort of go through all of these regenerations, and I imagine that even newer Doctors would have exactly the same sort of feeling. So to see that guilt and that sadness come through was really nice, and that's all I'm going to say, because I don't want to go into any more details because that would ruin the episode. Up next, we have the Fourth Doctor, K9, and Leela in an episode with the Lupari. The decision to include Leela in this episode is really interesting, and probably is one of the stronger points of the episode, because you have sort of Leela, who is a warrior race, or comes from a warrior race, and then you have the Lupari that are much the same, and seeing them clash is quite interesting. K9 is also really brilliant in this story, because there's a lot of comedic moments for him, and K9 has a trouble of sort of being left in the sidelines, particularly in the show itself, because of the practicalities of that robot. And with that, Big Finish is able to give him a lot more to do. It's very rare that I actually vocalise a laugh that I have, because I'm listening to these box sets and I am working at the same time. I'm kind of keeping a very straight face while I'm listening to these things, but this was able to break that with one of these jokes with K9. The episode beautifully expands on the Lupari, showing their race, which I think is a brilliant idea, because in Flux they didn't really have time to do that, because there was so much going on, and when you have the big weight of that entire loss of that species, and for there just to be Carvanista left, I think it was really important for this story to develop them a little bit more and show off what their culture's like. There's also this beautiful sort of Shakespearean drama going on that works really well, and I was not expecting at all. There's a beautiful bit of inevitability and foreshadowing in this story that I really enjoyed, because I like it when the world feels nicely connected. Obviously, when I look at box sets like these, and they're all individual stories, I think there's going to be one that's going to be my favourite, and that I'm really going to enjoy, and this wasn't really it, but it became my favourite while I was listening to it, because I was unexpectedly sort of caught off guard by it and thought, God, this is really good stuff. And finally, the Eighth Doctor sort of takes a back seat for a romance story. In this story, the Doctor is going on a series of dates with a man called Chris and trying to get him out of the illusions of the monks. And it works really well for multiple reasons. I think, first off, the idea of having so little characters allows you to actually focus on these relationships, and there's only 3 of them in the whole episode, so it really allows you to sort of hone in on just that, and there's not any clutter, to sort of cloud that. Then I think that the monks are really great in this episode, because you have this idea that they're making all these illusions and stuff like that. It means that you have a beautiful image of what's going on. It can be a little bit more surreal and a little bit odder than it probably normally would be. So when they're going on these dates and they're having chats in these restaurants and stuff like that, the image that I have is quite vast, and it's almost like a cruise ship kind of thing with this beautiful lighting and stuff like that. But it will be very different for everyone else, I'm sure. But with that, I was able to sort of picture every scene so viscerally, and the whole episode kind of came together because I could see every image that we have. There are moments when they kind of go slightly more into that surreal aspect. I think the monks work really well on audio. I think they may even work better on audio than they do in the show itself. When they were shot in Series 10, there's a lot of sort of otherworldly sort of stuff where they'd be blurry a lot of the time, especially in their first episode. So within this story, I can picture them how I'd like to picture them. And I see them as sort of lurking in the back of shots and stuff like that. And when they speak, there's a beautiful booming voice. They had the original actor come back to do the voice, and I didn't realise until recently that he's actually in the thick of it. There's two voices that you hear, so he's doing one voice, and then I think somebody else is doing the other. And that other voice, every time they speak, all I can sort of see in my mind is somebody hunched over in a booth doing the voice. And it kind of puts me out of it slightly, but it's not a bad thing at all. I also think that the voice lends itself quite nicely to audio, because the prosthetics didn't really allow the mouths to move very much. So you kind of have the same thing that you have with the Mondasian Cybermen, where they're kind of just opening and closing their mouths. And you have a very similar thing with the monks, which on audio isn't there. And they feel like you get a lot just from that very menacing, very sort of omnipotent voice. At the end of these videos, I always like to ask if I was satisfied by the story. And with these, it's very, very difficult to say anything but yes. These are like surefire hits to me. They're essential Doctor Who episodes because they bring it down to sort of bare bones, where you get a nice adventure and seeing the classic Doctors and the monsters that I watched when I was a kid kind of come together in these stories that tend to sort of push the boat out a little bit, and bringing all these Doctors and stuff together makes these stories a really varied experience for you to listen to. If I was to make, I one day probably will do so, but if I ever make a video talking about places to start with Big Finish, then this will definitely be a box set very high on that list. I had a lot of technical difficulties while making this video, audio-wise. I have bought a new mic, and it was not as good as I thought it was going to be, even though it was the same mic as the one I had before, which now puts me in the market for yet another lav mic, you know, the ones that clip on. So, here we go again. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure you like, and I shall see you soon. Goodbye.